Welcome to Lesson 7. In this lesson, we will have a look at visibility of variables and functions. There are 4 types of visibilities for functions and state variables. If you're not familiar with the term visibility, it simply declares what level of visibility a variable or function has within and outside the contract. We will have a look at how it works in the example later, but now let's explore what visibilities functions and state variables have. So functions can be specified as being external, public, internal, or private, where the default is public. For state variables, external is not possible and the default is internal. Now let's have a look at external visibility type. External functions are part of a contract interface, which means they can be called from other contracts and via transactions. An external function f cannot be called by simply typing f parenthesis. You have to use this.f parenthesis, which works since Solidity makes an actual call by sending a message to a contract, which makes it look like an external call. External functions are sometimes more efficient when we receive large arrays of data. In this example, we have 2 identical functions which return a uint array. In this case, a public function uses 496 gas to execute in comparison to only 261 gas for external function. So if your function is expected to receive large arrays of data and is only expected to be used by external contracts, I would recommend using external visibility. Public functions are part of a contract interface and can be either called internally or via messages by any other contract. It's the simplest type of all and it's visible within and outside the contract for everybody. Internal functions and state variables can only be accessed internally, which means that it can only be accessed from within the current contract or contracts deriving from it without using this, like in external functions. Internal can be compared to protected visibility in object-oriented languages such as Java, if you are familiar with it. Private functions and state variables are only visible for the contract that they are defined in and not in any derived contracts. Now, all of this can be quite confusing, so let's have a look at this example. As you can see, this is quite a chunky example, so I would recommend going to bdegree Solidity course, lesson 7 on GitHub, and find this code by yourself, then copy it all, like this, and make a new file on Remix IDE as usual, paste the code, and then compile it using JavaScript Virtual Machine. Now let's have a look at what this does. So we have a contract chatty with several state variables and functions. The state variables are simple strings which have different visibility types, so public, private, and internal. Then we have several functions which all do the same thing. They simply return a string, or to be more exact, a bytes array, but they all have different visibility types. So public, internal, private, and external. Now here below we have this function chat, which accepts a contract instance of the same chatty contract. So let's see how this behaves, and we will explore it by seeing what messages compiler throws at us. So in this case, the compiler is not complaining about anything, except that the function state mutability can be restricted to poor. So we can do that. And we call hello public function from within the chat function, and the compiler does not complain. So this works just fine because public functions are visible internally, so no problems here. And also public functions are visible by other contract instances. So buddy.helloPublic also works just fine. Now let's have a look at hello internal. This also will work, and buddy.helloInternal will not work since buddy is another contract instance. And we can see what the compiler is saying, and it's saying that hello internal is not found or not visible after argument dependent lookup in contract chatty. Now let's have a look at private visibility for functions. So let's uncomment this code, and hello private will work, but buddy.helloPrivate will not work again since buddy once again is another contract instance. What about hello external? This is a more interesting example. As you can see, there are 3 calls. So the first one, hello external, surprisingly does not work. So as I said here previously, external cannot be called internally, so simply calling f parenthesis does not work, and we have to use this.f parenthesis. So as you can see, hello external does not work since this is an internal call, but buddy.helloExternal works because it's another contract instance. And also this.helloExternal also works because we retrieve instance of current contract via a message. So this is quite surprising, but remember that the purpose of external visibility is to be used by another contracts. Now let's have a look at the strings we declared. So buddy.publicString will work, but buddy.privateString will not work since buddy is another contract instance, and if we comment this out, the compiler will also complain about internal string and will also throw a message that internal string is not visible. Once again, this is because buddy is another contract instance and internal strings are only visible to the same contract instance in which they were declared. So this could be some new syntax for you, but basically here we have a new contract which inherits from contract chatty. This is the same as in Java, for example, where we inherit a class from another class. So let's see how this behaves. Here we use hello public function from chatty contract and it works just fine, as you can see. Hello internal will also work because internal visibility is visible for derived contracts too. Chatty.helloPrivate will not work because private is only visible for the contract that they are defined in. And hello external will also not work because it can only be called from external contract instances. Now, public string will be visible, obviously, and internal string will be visible, but sorry, this is a wrong example. It should be like this, chatty.internal string, and this will work. Also, we have to remove this. So this works. And then let's see whether the private works, and it will not. So let's type chatty.private string. And this will not work because private is only visible for the contract that they are defined in. So this is it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we will have a look at ERC20 tokens, what they are, how they work, and that will prepare us to make an actual ERC20 token by ourselves.